get my shoes and out the door. 5, I'm alive. 6, 7, 8, feeling great.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beyond Your Wildest Genes podcast for this week. I am Dr. Wanda Lee McPhee, and I'm hosting this episode with my guest, Dr. Russell Kennedy, the Anxiety MD. Now, just as a little pre-warning, in case the recording isn't up to our top standard this week, I am talking on the east coast of Canada. Dr. Russell Kennedy is on the very, very far west coast of Canada, and we're experiencing where I am about 100-kilometer-an-hour winds, which I have no idea what that is in miles per hour for all the people listening in the States, but it's a lot of wind. So our connection is good, but maybe not great, and we're going to record anyway because it's just too important not to get this done. So Dr. Russell Kennedy is a medical doctor with additional degrees and training in neuroscience and developmental psychology. He's a certified yoga and meditation teacher, a professional stand-up comedian with over 1,000 appearances on comedy club stages across North America. You may have seen him where you are. He is an expert in all things anxiety related because he has studied anxiety extensively, both as a medical expert and perhaps even more importantly, by dealing with anxiety in his own personal life. So I think we're going to have a really helpful discussion today, and thank you for joining me, Russ.
Oh, you're more than welcome, Wanda. Thanks for having me.
Well, I know I just touched on a little bit of who you are and what you do. I mean, that's clearly only the very, very top of the surface. So maybe let's find out a little bit more about you. How did you end up as the Anxiety MD?
Well, mostly because I'm an MD that also has anxiety. So those are the two things that I sort of crammed together. I mean, I guess going way back, my father had schizophrenia. And my mother was a neurotic worrier. So that psychotic sperm and neurotic egg kind of fused together, and you got me. So I watched my dad kind of deteriorate from the time I was about 10 until he finally took his own life when he was 52. I guess I was 26 at that time. So I remember a time where I would see him being in the mental hospital and thinking, well, one day I've got to make this make sense, because as a teenager, I didn't really know what was going on. Our medical therapies aren't that great for schizophrenia for sure. And I kept thinking he was going to get better, and he never really did. So I kind of devoted my career to mental illness and specifically anxiety, because, I've struggled with anxiety since I was a teenager that I can remember. So it's one of the reasons I became a yoga teacher, and ironically, a stand-up comedian was, creativity. If you look at the Ayurvedic doctors, the doctors of ancient India, they think that creativity is actually the cure for anxiety. And I love doing stand-up. I love doing artistic things because I do think that it does help calm that anxious brain. So in a little nutshell, that's kind of how I do things. And I really focus on people's stories. Like, why are they anxious? Because I'm not a big believer in a lot of medications. And a lot of it I can track back to attachment trauma. If you look at Dr. Daniel Siegel's work, and that kind of thing. I think there's a lot more to mental illness than just treating it with medication or even talk therapy. And I'm sure we'll get into that. But that's as short as I get.
Well, and that's why it is such a wonderful fit for our program. I mean, our focus is on epigenetics and right. How the ways that we think and what we eat and what we do and how we live our life changes, in a sense, who we express ourselves as. And I love your philosophy of really trying to get to the root cause of some of these things and look at behaviors in a different way than simply medicating them or pretending they don't exist there somewhere.
Yeah. Because I do think, in modern medicine these days that, the MDs have a limited amount of time and, they do want to help for sure. I think the medical doctors really do want to help. And, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if you are, pharmaceutically inclined and you have someone in front of you and you can't give an hour psychotherapy to them, it is one of those sort of knee-jerk reactions. And I was like this too when I practiced a lot with mental health issues, as I practiced by prescribing medications. And although I really felt uncomfortable with medications in general, so I always try to get to the root cause. And of course, as a GP, that's not really, from a time sense, working, because you can't spend 45 minutes with each patient or an hour that you need to really drill down and find their old traumas and really get to the root of these things, as opposed to just treating them with medication.
Absolutely. And of course, there's a role for those acute episodes, and there's a time and a place for everything. But it's nice to have a chance to talk about really the basics of this and getting back to the basics of anxiety. So in your world, what is anxiety?
Well, that's the $1 million question, Wandalee. That is the $1 million question, because if I ask 100 people what is anxiety, I'm going to get probably 60 different answers to that, and 40 won't even know what anxiety is because they've never really experienced it. One of their friends might say, "Oh, I'm feeling anxious," and if you've never experienced anxiety before, it's really confusing. So I don't even like the word anxiety. I think that there's a lot of ways that anxiety manifests. It manifests in eating disorders, in kids not going to school, in sweating autonomic symptoms where your body is just kind of on fire. So there's no real consistent definition for anxiety, except for my own that I made up, which is basically anxiety is purely anxious stories and thoughts of the mind. And to be differentiated from alarm, which is the body thing, which we'll get into, I think. But anxiety to me is just anxious stories and thoughts. And that's the way I explain it to people. And then I have a thing about alarm that goes on after that. But anxiety to me is just anxious stories and thoughts. That's all it is.
Well, and we hear a lot about anxiety. It seems to be rampant. Certainly, I have 2 teenage children. And, that is, I think, the diagnosis of every third girl that I know. It's just really becoming a prevalent challenge. And so anxiety is everywhere. And why are we seeing this? Why are people becoming anxious? And maybe it's always been there, but it seems like more again lately.
Well, I think it's because of Trump. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, although he does, there is something called the Trump anxiety disorder in the States. I think there's a recognized Trump-based anxiety disorder in the States that may actually make it into the DSM. But I think we're just living in a much more anxious world. And, there's 2 major systems in our body. There's the autonomic nervous system, the fight or flight versus rest and digest. And there's also the social engagement system that Dr. Stephen Porges talks about how we interact, what he calls neuroception, how we interact with other people's nervous systems based on our own nervous system. And there's just so much more anxious energy in the world now. And kids I think they're just more sensitive to it. And that's why we're seeing such a huge increase in teenagers with anxiety, because they're picking up on the anxiety that's just in the world. Even though we've never lived in a more peaceful time in our existence as human beings, there is more anxiety now than there ever has been before. And with the social engagement system, when, I don't know how old you are, Wandalee, but I'm, in my 50s now. And when we were younger, we would play with our friends and we would watch their face. And if they fell and hurt themselves, we would look at their not consciously, but we would look at their face and we would see that they were upset. Or if they were really, really happy, we would look at their face and see, how that reflected back. And there's part of our brain that's really focused on faces and reading emotion. And now with all the kids, with everything being screen-based, we're not really seeing that one-on-one, face-to-face interaction. And that part of the brain isn't being matured anymore. So when you don't have that ability to soothe yourself through other people, and the world is really, really topsy-turvy, it's going to be really hard for you to self-regulate, to regulate that mind and body back together, because I do believe at its fundamental basis, anxiety results from the mind and the body being disconnected. The mind goes off on its own and starts worrying and becoming, overly hyperactive, and the body has its own way of being hyperactive too. Your gut clenches, you sweat more, and the two become more and more disenfranchised. And that's why I think yoga, qigong, these practices, breathing, that allow the mind and body coming back together are so effective in anxiety, because all that you can do, all the cognitive therapy in the world that you want, but unless you get that body in line, you're not really going to fix that anxiety.
My goodness, that sounded a bit like a chiropractor there for a minute.
Well, you know what? Dr. Nima Ramon is a really good friend of mine. We talk just about every day. So he and I kind of blend back and forth, I do have a very open way of looking at, medicine. I am a hardcore scientist as well. I am a hardcore MD when it comes down to some things. But, you really have to be able to talk to people. And I think that's where the alternative health I know I even don't like using that term, chiropractors, naturopaths, that kind of stuff. They have typically a better way with patients than we do as medical doctors. And I think there's a number of reasons for that, which could be an entirely different podcast. But, you really do need that healing kind of words from your physician. It's not just a matter of, okay, this is what you have, this is what we're going to do about it. And I think the chiropractors and the naturopaths and the alternative health, the non-allopathic MD doctors, are a lot better at that in general than the medical doctors. And that's evidenced by the amount of money that's spent in the United States on non-allopathic medicine. In 2015 or 16, I can't remember the exact year, but the spending for the first time eclipsed what it was in allopathic medicine to the sort of naturopaths, the chiropractors, the alternative health practitioners. They're making more money than the medical doctors are now because I think they fundamentally have a better rapport with patients. I mean, there are great medical doctors out there. I've met tons and tons of them.
For sure.
But I've also met medical doctors who are pretty, they're more like technicians. They're more like, okay, well, this is wrong with you. This is what we're going to do about it. And there really isn't that human connection that really engages that social engagement system that invokes that placebo effect, if you're even going to use that. You need that to really heal. It has to be sort of a multifactorial thing. A doctor isn't just someone you can plug into your symptoms into a computer and they spit out a prescription.
Absolutely.
Anyway, I'm getting all upset.
And that physical component, separating the mind from the body, it is impossible. I mean, we are an integrated system, and I, as a chiropractor myself, I mean, I see that when we adjust people and their sympathetic nervous system can re-equilibrate, then they can be available to some of those other opportunities to heal. And we may not be treating their anxiety in any way, but we're giving their body a chance to reset. And therefore giving their mind a chance to open just a little bit to let that in, which is a wonderful combination. Yeah.
And that's what you need to be a true doctor, I think.
It's not an either-or game, and I think it's great that we seem to be moving a little bit more into that, which is wonderful. So treating anxiety, it hasn't been particularly long-term effective. Is there a reason for that?
I think the reason for that is that we, focus on the mind so much. We assume that the mind is the nervous system, whereas the mind is just a component of the nervous system. We assume that our thinking is actually who we are, and that's actually not the case at all. And we don't really incorporate the body in the healing of the mind. And this is true almost across the board among healers, is that typically it's kind of, you go for psychotherapy. You go in for, if we talk out our problems. And as human beings, we really do have to talk out our situation to be able to understand it. We have this huge prefrontal cortex in the front of our head that really understands things at a very cognitive level. And we've made the mistake of believing that we can fix anxiety and depression purely cognitively. So if you look at the Western model of psychologists and psychiatrists, it's like, okay, you go in once a week and you talk to your mental health care worker, and over the course of a year or two, you're supposed to get a lot better. But that doesn't seem to be the case. I know lots of people who have been going to their psychiatrist for 10 years, and I asked them, are you a lot better? It's like, well, no, not really. And I kind of have a little joke in there, like if you had a leak in your house, and you invited the plumber over once a week for an hour to fix it, and you did that for 5 years, and the leak wasn't a whole lot better, would you keep paying that guy? Would you keep going to that? But that's about all we have, and we're not really, I think the biggest problem is that we are not addressing the sense of alarm that's in the body. We address the cognitive part, and we need both. It's not that we don't need psychotherapy, but we need to also embrace the body. We need to sort of get that body regulated, get into breathing techniques, get into yoga, get into qigong, get some sort of sense in your body so that your mind can slow down enough so that your body and your mind can reconnect. And then you can start to self-regulate. Because if you can't self-regulate, you're going to be anxious for the rest of your life. So it's really, really important to start to realize that anxiety is just basically the thoughts of the mind. What we really need to treat, what we really need to get at, is this sense of alarm in the body. So we really need to work on body-based techniques along with cognitive therapy that really join together. And I think that's why our long-term success rate with anxiety and depression to some extent is not that great, because we're not including the body in the healing of the mind. And I think we're going to look back in 10, 25 years and go, why did we just ignore the body? Why did we think that we could do it all through the mind? Because we can't. We just simply can't heal just using mind-based strategies.
Well, and that sort of prompts a little theoretical thought in my mind as we're talking about that, because we're seeing probably the most sedentary population we have ever seen. Sitting is the new smoking. It is the root of all kinds of health challenges, and perhaps is part of the root of some of this influx of anxiety and depression that we do see in the population.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, Stephen Porges talks about the vagal theory of, the triune vagus, the three-part vagus nerve. And when he talks about ventral vagus, that's the nerve, it's the 10th cranial nerve, it's the nerve that kind of runs through our whole body almost and calms us down. Now, if we're not using that nerve properly, we're not going to get better. And there is something called the dorsal vagus, which is the unmyelinated kind of primitive vagus nerve, which really is what animals get when they're cornered by a predator. They go into what's dorsal vagal freeze. And that's what a lot of us go into in deep anxiety or deep depression. We get into this dorsal vagal freeze response. And the tendency is to sit there or lie there in bed with your covers tucked up to your chin and not moving. And all that does is allow you to stay in your head, get a lot more cognitive, which is not going to help you, because typically when you're in alarm, you're going to create stories based on that negative feeling in your body that are negative. So movement in and of itself starts getting you out of that dorsal vagal. It starts moving you into ventral vagal. It starts moving you into an area that can be fixed or moved around. But if you're just frozen there, and sitting on some level is a form of that as well, you're not going to move. Even getting up and putting on some music and just dancing your brains out in your bedroom is going to help you with anxiety. It will automatically get you out of that dorsal vagal shutdown and into some sort of activation. And then when you get into activation, you can move into what I call the green stage. I have this little traffic light analogy, which is red is dorsal vagal freeze. Yellow is activation, because basically we need to be activated. That's what emotion is there for. And then green is this curious, receptive, playful state where we start integrating a lot of the things that we're learning. And if you're in fight or flight and you're in a therapy session for the entire fight or flight, your brain isn't going to absorb very much of that therapy session at all. We need to get people back into this green stage where their body is relaxed, their mind is open at that point, and then you can start working with some of these issues. But if someone's in dorsal vagal, if they're in freeze, you have to get them out of freeze or they're not going to hear anything.
That's a great point. And that kind of leads us to where we love to focus with the podcast is, giving people some tools for themselves. What are some practical things that people can do to help understand what's going on, maybe help their anxiety symptoms? What could people do?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing, I think, is to match your breath and your movement. Because like I say, your mind and your body become disconnected in anxiety. Your mind goes off on its own little, worry trip, and your body gets separated from that. And your body will react to any story that you tell it as if it's actually happening. So these horrible stories that we tell ourselves based on the alarm that's in our system, based on the alarm that's in our body, it gets read by the mind and says, okay, well, what are we alarmed about? Well, we're alarmed about money. We're alarmed about our relationship. We're alarmed about, should I spend this? Should I get this? There's a lot of alarm in there. And if we can't calm that alarm first, then the thoughts are just going to follow. And then the thoughts are just going to make everything worse. So basically what I think happens is that you get this alarm in your system, which I think comes from two cases. One, from unresolved trauma, and two, from some people are just really sensitive. So they're just really sensitive to that autonomic nervous system, that sympathetic fight or flight. And then when your body feels that way, your mind is going to make up a story that's completely consistent with how you feel. And then that goes up to your brain. You make the story up, and then the story inflames the alarm in your body, and the alarm in your body inflames the story. So you get into what I call the alarm anxiety cycle. So what we have to do is basically attack the cycle from both sides. We have to kind of dismember the cycle. We have to break the cycle. Because if you let alarm and anxiety link together, you're never going to get out of that. So if you can separate the thought from the emotion behind it, then you can start really uncoupling this old anxiety alarm program that's locking you into stress. So things like matching your breath and your movement, really focusing on your breath, getting really in the moment, as much as in the moment's, the catchphrase these days, but getting in the moment, getting into your body, really feeling your body. A lot of people have never really made a conscious thing like, what does my body feel like right now? Just sitting in a chair, or what does my breathing feel like right now? We're so in our heads. We're so trying to explain everything all the time. So getting into your body would be the first thing. Movement is another thing. Movement is something like getting up and dancing, moving, yoga, qigong. That's why yoga and qigong are so helpful with anxiety, is because it matches your breath and your movement together, and it gets you moving. And on top of that, you do need some cognitive therapy. You do need to understand what happened to you as a child, typically, depending on how severe your anxiety is. And it's the combination of both. And what I fear and what I see a lot of is people going in for these cognitive therapies, and they don't address the body at all. So the healing you get from that is relatively short-lived, because I think that the body component is probably, in a way, a little more important than the mind component. If you fix the alarm in the body, by yoga, qigong, breathing properly, feeling your body, getting in, feeling your butt in the chair, feeling your hands on your thighs, like get into your body, it automatically takes you out of your head. And anything that takes you out of your head takes you away from those horrible stories that you're telling yourself. And then those horrible stories you can deal with some cognitive therapy. I'm not against cognitive therapy at all. I think it's amazing. But just cognitive therapy alone is not going to fix you. Now, that was a long ramble, so I don't know if I made a whole lot of sense there. But the bottom line is that you have to address the alarm that's in your system. You have to address the alarm that's in your body. And great ways of doing that are movement, matching breath and movement together, breathing, chanting, meditation. I'm really a mixed mind about as far as anxiety goes, because a lot of people, you got to remember that anxiety started off as a defense coping mechanism, usually when we're younger. So anything that's going to take that defense mechanism away from you is going to increase, ironically, more anxiety. It's going to give you more anxiety. So meditation for some people seems to help, but if you're meditating and it's making you worse, just be really aware of that, because meditation is not a cure-all for anxiety. And it can actually make some people worse. But really, it's getting into your body. It's getting creative, as well as what I said at the start of the program. What do you like? Like, what do you really have an affinity to? What are you good at? What's your superpower? And then focus on that. Focus on some creativity. And that will take some of that anxious energy away from you as well. But really, I think the biggest problem that we make in North America is treating the mind over and over again with therapy, not really addressing the body, and putting a tremendous amount of pressure on psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers to fix us, when we really need to take that responsibility to ourselves. And we can fix the body. We can do lots of things that are body-based. We don't need therapists for that. But it also creates this really nice, fertile foundation for when you do go in and talk it out. You've already got some, alarm reduction, and an alarm reduction skill that you can use any time of day. One of the things that I love asking myself when I'm waking up with anxiety in the middle of the night is, am I safe in this moment? Like, in this moment, am I safe? Because anxiety is always, always, always about the future. So am I safe in this moment? And almost always the answer is yes. So if you're safe in this moment, you're safe, because all we have is this moment. So again, another ramble, which is what you get with me.
Well, it's kind of ironic, because I do yoga quite regularly myself, and it wasn't today's class. I think maybe it was on Friday last week. And that is actually how that particular yoga instructor started the class, when everyone's lying there getting ready to start, is there any threat to you right now?
Nice.
No, you're in a safe place. So you can let all of that stuff go and just be on your mat. And
Yeah.
it was ironic because I was just finishing doing some prep for our talk today, and it was just tied everything together with a nice little bow. And then here you are doing it.
Nice.
Yeah.
And the other thing about yoga too is that there's all sorts of yoga. I'm a real big fan of basic hatha yoga, matching your breath and your movement. You don't have to dance around. You don't have to twist yourself into a pretzel. Drift yourself into a pretzel. You just have to, stay in the moment, breathe with your movement, and all this sort of hot yoga, yin, vinyasa. Yin yoga is actually really, really good because it slows you right down. But we're turning yoga into an exercise. And really what it was meant to be is a nice way of your mind and your breathing and your body all coming together in this nice little flow state. That's what it was designed to do. And now we've kind of changed it into this commercial enterprise. But really, ultimately, the yoga you're going to get the most effect out of is one that's nice and slow. It can be intense, for sure, but it's just matching your breath and your movement and making you feel in your body. So many times, if you're listening to this in the car, feel your butt on your seat. Like, just really, what does your body feel like? Because we don't do that in this society. We don't feel our bodies. We feel through our heads. And that's one of the reasons why we're getting so anxious. We're not grounded anymore.
And that people really are, as a chiropractor, certainly I see it every single day, multiple times, how disconnected people really can become from their body. And teaching them to feel that again, to acknowledge it, to recognize it, and then to do what needs to be done or let that go is really a big part of healing from all kinds of things, not just anxiety.
Absolutely.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So I know you are working on a book.
Yeah, I'm working on a book right now called The ABCs of Anxiety. And basically I take every letter of the alphabet. It kind of looks like a bit of a children's book. And I'm talking to my editor about how this is going to look, but I take every letter of the alphabet and I contrast it. Like the first one, A, is awareness versus autopilot. Because most of our lives we go through on autopilot. We just kind of, do things the way we're supposed to. Kids have to go to basketball practice, and then we do this and we do that. And then we just get caught in our heads in this like whir of, this chronic, chatter of our minds. And just being aware of that, being aware of what you tell yourself. What are you consciously telling yourself? And then also, when you're aware of what you're consciously telling yourself, you can be aware of what you're unconsciously telling yourself, which is probably even more important. But it's just getting into that arena where you feel this sense of awareness versus just going through this autopilot. Just what I said before about the what I said before about feeling your butt in the seat of the car. We don't do that. There's a thing called one breath meditation, where you basically just take one breath and you focus all your energy. It takes what, 12 seconds? And it's just one breath meditation. And you just breathe in and then breathe out. So I encourage everybody, let's do that right now. Let's just do a one breath meditation, feeling your body. Ready? Just sort of nice deep breath in. And a nice deep breath all the way out. There you go. You're already a little more calm. You're more in your body. It's not that hard. It really is not that hard, but we make it hard.
Absolutely. And you have an online program as well.
Yeah, it's called the Kennedy Method Online, and that's a www address, thekennedymethodonline.com. And it's pretty much a masterclass in anxiety. It's not sort of something for if you're like, I have a little bit of anxiety. It's if anxiety is really running your life. And I just got a brilliant review from one of the psychiatrists over in Vancouver about it, because it really does go into my history with anxiety and how it's ruled my life for so long, and just understanding where it comes from, and more importantly, what you can do about it, how you can use sort of body-based practices and mind-based practices as well to heal. And that's really what it comes down to. It's fairly extensive, though. It's not, I think it's only 8 hours as far as like continuous video, but it's full of different bits of information. It'll take you back to your childhood. It'll go through your anxiety and alarm mechanism, and how you can separate the thoughts of your mind from the alarm in your body, and realize, because that's one of the biggest tips that I can give you, is that when you're anxious, if you're feeling anxious, stop trusting your mind, because it's not going to help you. It's only going to take you down a deeper path of anxiety. So what's really important, probably one of the single best thing I can tell you is, am I safe in this moment is always great. But just realizing that when you're anxious, your thoughts are not your friend. As much as you believe your thoughts are helping you, they're actually making you worse. I had a patient of mine years ago come in and talk to me, and he lost his wife, and he said, "Dr. Kennedy, I'm so anxious and depressed. I've just got to dig myself out of this hole." And I said, "Well, you can't dig yourself out of a hole, dude." I mean, I don't know if I said dude, but you can't dig yourself out of a hole. When you're in a hole, stop digging. So one of the biggest things that I tell people is, get into your body, breathe into your body, and stop listening to your mind, because your mind is not helping you. I mean, unless you can start going into positive affirmations, but I really, things like meditation, things like breathing, things that get you into your body and out of your head are the ways that are going to, lead you to more towards recovery. Because your mind, as much as you think it's there to help you, when you're anxious, your anxious mind is trying to run you. And it's trying actually to make you more anxious. And it's not doing it on purpose. It's just the way the mind works. It's always looking for answers. And typically, we're not anxious about stuff we know the answer to. We're anxious about uncertainty of some kind. And that, when the mind gets a hold of uncertainty, I'll tell you, there is no way of letting that go unless you get into your body.
Wow, that's really powerful. I mean, I have a feeling people are going to be rewinding and listening to this a couple of times to make sure they get all those gems out of there. And we will certainly have all of your contact information, your connections, and your online course link on our show notes, as well as on the website when this is posted very soon. So that will be available for anybody who's listening to this in their car. You don't have to worry about pulling over right now and writing that down. We'll have it for you.
Yeah, I've got a YouTube page and a Facebook page, and the Anxiety MD is my website, and everything kind of feeds into each other. So if you get into one of them, you'll find all of them.
Perfect. We'll put all of those things up there, so that'll be great. And I think, one of the things that intrigued me about, I actually saw your stuff on Facebook first before reaching out to do this podcast, is just how incredibly wonderful a combination that is of having your expertise and your knowledge and yet your experience. Because sometimes, being able to go through that and see what works and see what doesn't and put all those pieces together is really a very personal journey, and it's something that a lot of people can benefit from. So we appreciate you sharing that today.
Thanks, Wandalee. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I've been both anxiety doctor and anxiety patient, so I get to cut out the middleman. I get to sort of figure out what works for me. Not that what works for me is going to work for everybody, but I mean, I think there are some fundamental mistakes that we're making in this society at treating anxiety and depression to some extent, and all mental illness. And I try and get my word out there, and that there is an alternative. There's a different way of doing things, and I hope that I'll be able to do more of that as time goes by.
Well, hopefully when your book comes out, we'll get a chance to do this again.
That'd be great.
But until then, is there any final comment, any message, any thought you want to leave with our audience, or any action if a thought is not appropriate?
I think, starting to do that 1 minute or one breath meditation, just committing to that for a week and just seeing what it's like to be in your body and just seeing what it's like, because most of us spend so much time in our heads that we don't even realize that the body is there. And the body is the way we're going to heal from mental illness. The body is the way that we're going to heal from a lot of these things that are happening to us now, because we are just inundated with these cognitive thinking processes and things that are going on in the world, and shootings and all this stuff, is that we really have to fundamentally reconnect with our body. And the one breath meditation, I think, is great to start, just to start getting into that, because most of us, I know I was like this, when I started doing this about 15 years ago, just completely in my head. And of course I was going to get more and more anxious. So just realizing that that your mind is only a component of your nervous system. As much as it tries to convince you that it's the whole thing, it's not. It's really getting into your body. And not that there's anything wrong with your mind. It's just that once you get into your body, you see a whole new perspective, and that's really what's healed me.
That's wonderful. So thanks for joining us. This was Dr. Russell Kennedy, the Anxiety MD, and I will be putting all those notes on the show notes, all of the contact information, Facebook, social media, all kinds of things. So you'll be able to hear more from him, and we appreciate you joining us, Russell, and we hope to do that again when we have an opportunity to see your new book, so that will be fun. And thanks everyone else for listening. If you like what you hear, please share it. It's free as always. Head to iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, go to the website, www.beyondyourwildestgenes.com, and you can download, listen, share, whatever you need to do to make sure that this wonderful message gets out to as many people as possible. And of course, while you're on the website, register for our weekly newsletter. We bring all kinds of different information to our written medium as well. And we do share a few extra recordings from time to time, so it gives you a way to keep track of what we're up to. So thank you, everyone, for listening. Thanks for sharing our passion to create a healthier world, and we hope you join us for more next week.